And we'll start with Ms. Taylor. And good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon. I think by now everyone's pretty familiar with who I am and what I do and what I'd like to see in the city in terms of a vibrant local food economy. The last time I came into this room, I spent a lot of time listing policy changes that would make my job as a farmer a lot easier. So today I'm going to talk about what we already have accomplished against great odds and invite everyone in this room to pick up a digging fork and join in. I don't want to create a false impression that our farm is idle and in limbo waiting for this legislation to pass, nor that with the passing of the legislation, our work would be done. I also want to steer clear of implying that the roads to a sustainable, healthy community is achieved through one-way channels. We all have a role to play in order to increase residents' consumption of healthy food and implement positive economic and environmental changes in the city. This hearing is not only a chance to support a specific piece of legislation that's been the culmination of 3 years of work on the part of our farm, but also to make sure that politicians, local businesses, organizations, and residents know what's happening at a grassroots level. We growers are a part of living history. Those of us who coerce vitamin-rich produce out of urban soils know that the road is long, and this is only the beginning. Here's a glimpse into our farm year, focusing on the economics of farming, which I notice is a foreign concept to most. I want people to understand how accessible this is. Once this legislation passes, the door will be open for dozens of others to join Three Part Harmony Farm, Good Sense Farm and Apiary, and Little Redbird Botanicals, the members of Community Farming Alliance. So I want to take some of the mystery out of starting your own farm by reminding everyone here that the #1 investment required is your knowledge and ability, followed by at least one hand, and a penchant to work outdoors in all kinds of weather. To get my farm started, I budgeted about $10,000 for the first 3 years. We start spending money in January when seeds, potting soil, and other supplies must be bought in order to get the greenhouse running by mid-February. The most economically efficient way to buy supplies is all at once because the suppliers give us a bulk discount. In 2014, I've spent just under $2,500 in seeds and plants, an additional $900 on tools, trellis, and knives, and I buy locally produced compost, which I spent about $2,100 on 3 deliveries so far. This prepay system, spending money before you harvest a crop, has created a system of loan dependency for farmers. Lucky farmers take out a loan from themselves or close family members and front the money for supplies from some source of wealth or assets that they have instead of taking on debt with an interest rate. I did this, spending about $8,000 from my savings account in 2012 and 2013. We also take donations and have a small amount of income from sales, though right now that's limited because of a lack of access to sufficient space to grow and sell vegetables. That's why we added plant sales last year. This year we've received just under $9,000 in donations. That in addition to a community grant we received late last year in the amount of $4,750. On this limited income, we have 3 employees who work a total of 16 hours a week. We also have an incredibly generous work exchange program, so volunteers receive $30 to $35 in produce in exchange for 3 hours of labor. The first year we operated in the red. The next year we broke even. This year we're on pace to finish with money in the bank account to help cover some of those January 2015 expenses. It's pretty good for a new farm. Each time someone drives by and stops and asks, "What are you doing in that big field?" and are amazed by the transformation over the last 2.5 years, it boosts my spirits and prepares me for another hard day. Our productivity is on par with a successful farm as well. This year, our greenhouse grew 1,400 tomato plants alone. We had 11 different kinds of basil, 10 other herbs, and your typical array of peppers, squash, cucumbers, eggplants, and chilies. In addition, we added bedding plants this year, so now DC gardeners can have a source of pesticide-free pansies and petunias. From mid-February to mid-June, we grow seedlings for the farm and for local gardeners. I also have a bit in here in the prepared testimony about how much produce we've donated just this year alone, and I'll be happy to take questions about it.
Ms. Taylor, I didn't have the advantage of your written statement. I wanted to ask you a little bit more. Did you work on the formulation of this bill?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And all right, so you're somebody that we can work with regard to what the objectives are in the legislation. And
yeah, I approached Mr. Grosso's office because I thought that he would be a great partner to work on in drafting this legislation, and his office has been incredibly helpful in figuring things out and going back and forth. The reason why we have a minimum 3-year requirement for city-owned properties is because I picked that number, and I think that it's a good minimum starting point. The 5,000 square foot minimum is based on my experience of being a farmer in the city for 3 years. I think everything in the bill that we have as it stands should get passed as is. It's not perfect. There won't be anything perfect. This bill is amending a 1986 piece of legislation that never got enacted. The reality is every day we're all getting dirt under our fingernails, and we just want a little bit more of an opportunity to produce more food in a way that provides us some amount of dignity. Like Kristen is saying, the inability to sell our produce is a major inhibitor in what we do.
So you have 5,000 square feet?
I actually farm on 2 acres plus. I thought 5,000 square feet would be the minimum in a single plot that would make it worth going there and tilling.
And this is in the city?
Yeah.
Are you okay saying where?
Mm-hmm. Our 2-acre plot is in Brookland, northeast, near the corner of Michigan and 4th. In April, we hosted Mr. Grosso and his staff to come out and take a walk around with us.
And you are a nonprofit or a for-profit?
No, I'm just a regular farmer. So in farm speak, we don't generally incorporate ourselves as 501c3. You won't find that very common when you go to your farmers markets. None of them are 501c3s. I'm an LLC.
Okay, and you own the land?
No,
Or you lease?
I have a contract.
And it's a private private
Yeah,
landowner?
I haven't had very good luck in leasing land from the city. I've had several requests out to DGS to lease city-owned land that were never answered. I've had a lot of luck leasing backyard spaces from private citizens who just appreciate that they don't have to mow their lawn anymore, and they love that their neighbors are just envious of the gardens that I keep in their yard. And then this 2-acre property is owned by priests who also appreciate that we're contributing positively to the natural environment there.
Mr. Grosso, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I'll just make a note that this bill doesn't help in selling the vegetables on that property because it's owned by a nonprofit. So at some point we need to explore whether or not to expand it to allow nonprofits to get some benefit to also permit the sale. If they were to sell the vegetables, if I understand it correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, but if they were to sell the vegetables on the land that's owned by I think it's an order of priests there in Brookland, then they would put it in jeopardy their 501c3 status of their own kind of, their order. And so it would be interesting if we could carve out, and I've talked to the CFO about doing this, carve out just the land that she uses to allow that to be used to sell the vegetables off of there as a for-profit, without jeopardizing the 501c3 status of who's leasing her the land. It's a nuanced, and it's hard to kind of imagine, but I think it's possible. We've spoken to the CFO about doing this, and they've done that before where they've kind of specifically drawn a line around a particular portion of property in order to treat it differently than another that's owned by maybe even the same owner, but one is for one tax purpose and another for a different tax purpose. So anyway, it's complicated. I didn't put it in this bill, but I'm hoping as we move forward we keep it in mind and maybe we can amend it to do that. As I noted in my opening, I had some interaction on this legislation online, which is a kind of a new way to go about doing this, and I wanted to just mention a couple of questions that came off of that effort, and you guys might be able to help me answer. One of them came from I don't know if it's a man or a woman, Alexander Moore on Madison, when they asked that it may be important to mandate kind of end-use reporting if this is city property on kind of the use of the property, and we kind of can better understand what's being done there over the long run and the impact it's having on the city. So if our purpose here is to have more farming and more vegetables locally produced and, kind of get the blight out, how do we go back and look and make sure that actually happened? I don't know if any of you have any thoughts on the reporting, maybe putting in more reporting requirements.
I guess my first question would be what reporting requirements the city has for anyone who leases property from the city, which there's quite a bit on the city rolls.
Right, there
And I
is.
think that there should be parity. I mean, I'm okay with this end use reporting requirements, definitely. If we're saying we want to take blighted property and turn it into something beautiful, there needs to be some way of measuring it, which is really difficult. You could talk about how many pounds you donated, but I worked at a nonprofit farm for almost 6 years, and we measured our donations in pounds, and I think there's a limitation to that, because that means I'm always giving potatoes and turnips, and nobody who's getting donated produce ever gets to eat lettuce, and that's just not a fair way of measuring it. So there's some limitations to that, but my first question would be, what's happening in other places?
Right, I agree, and I think it's something we should look at. Another question we got was around the use of pesticides or other harmful chemicals and whether or not they should be prohibited. C. Kalen asked this question on Madison as well, and I'm just curious what you guys think about that. We don't prohibit it. We obviously are trying to let the farmer be a farmer in the way they want, but I would support that. My farm I grew up on was an all-organic farm, and I don't know if that's something we would want to try to include in the law.
Yeah, we talked about this the last time when we talked about chickens and goats and other things that maybe we could take a cue from our neighbors in other states and just kind of transplant their services and ideas and information. These are kinds of things like the District of Columbia is kind of in a vacuum, and when we try to think about how to create urban agriculture in the city, we really need to realize that there's a lack of infrastructure here that this bill is not going to solve. In Maryland, the State Department of Agriculture and the Department of Health, all of these state-led institutions are already designed to regulate pesticide use, runoff into the Chesapeake Bay, all of these things. The Potomac and the Anacostia is running into the bay. So, yeah, of course, whatever the other states have already put into regulations in terms of making sure that farms are not just sending nitrogen and phosphorus into the bay, that's so easy. We can just have the same legislation here.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and I don't know if this is the bill to do that. It may not be, and it may be something broader on an agricultural attempt. Once we get really going in this concept, I think some of the requirements we already put around this bill, that there be some experience, that be local, all that, we'll keep it in that regard. I have one last question while I have you at the table. I want to kind of understand, and this is another Madison question, what is the kind of definition for you guys of what a successful farm is? You heard my definition. You heard what I talked about around mass production and bringing food locally, creating it locally for local consumption. What's a successful farm? How much money do you have to make? Where does the food have to go? All those conversations. I'll give you the rest of my time to talk about that.
I think that's a hard question to ask. I mean, everybody knows I keep beating the drum of productive farm means that I'm growing a lot of vegetables, that I'm making enough money to pay myself and my crew a living wage, that there's something tangible. I can put fresh produce on a table and feel really good about it and live in dignity. And yet, every time I'm at the farm, there's this kind of body and soul healing that happens that's totally intangible and surprises me. 2 weeks ago, a woman who lives in the neighborhood came through the gate and stood in front of me, with me in front of a fig tree that I planted last fall, and had this tender moment. We shared a devotion that she had in her bag, and she told me about a hard conversation she had had with a friend the day before, and she left there feeling healed and gave me a $20 donation. She was just totally inspired. To me, being a farm and successful in the city means that we're touching people's lives and healing their bodies and souls.
I'll tell you, when I was a kid and we were on a 65-acre farm out in Virginia in Loudoun County, my family did all organic farming. We had animals, we had vegetable garden and everything, and we had enough vegetables there to give it away, a lot of food. But I also know that it wouldn't have been possible to do that if it weren't for my father being a dentist and living and working in Roslyn, Virginia every day. He rode in an hour and did his dental practice and came back out. And when my parents divorced, we had to sell the farm because my dad no longer lived there and my mom wouldn't take his money, so we sold the farm. Now, that was not sustainable. That was not necessarily a plan. Could we have done it? Probably, right? I think if our commitment had been to have a living farm there, it would have been doable because we had the land and we had the facilities with the great barn and everything. But the the fact is, it takes a lot more, I think, to embrace urban farming is going to take these other aspects that you're talking about. It's not just about the bottom dollar, although that's very important. It has to have more to it that makes it a part of, integral part of the community.
Yeah, and I don't know how to write a report that says that.
Well, you're going to have to figure it out. Thank you all.